What's up, Diablo 4 players? So today we're going to have a discussion video about specifically the endgame. We're going to be talking about bosses in general as well as the Mythic, because this kind of ties in. The reason why you do these layer endgame bosses in the game is to obviously get the Mythic uniques. And I want to talk about some philosophy in terms of game design, as well as get your guys' feedback, because I'm going to give Blizzard some suggestions regarding what you guys think with these bosses, because I've genuinely been kind of tired of farming specifically for the Mythics. It just takes too dang long to farm them, and I want to say there is definitely some player fatigue around this whole subject matter. You can see this person saying, I'll be honest, I'm really over this layer boss immunity phases, and this includes death animations. It's just that, like, they've said on the campfire, which is their live stream, that it said, we don't want you guys to keep on farming bosses again and again. But then if you make these drop rates of these Mythics, which are required pretty much if you want to do the end game content in the pit to max out your glyphs, you need to have the Mythics. And because of this, it kind of creates a environment where it's like it's something that the players get too tired of doing again and again. Another thing is people complaining about Lilith, and I've seen complaints about Lilith a lot of times. However, I want to say, at least with Lilith, the Blood Waves, which was the main offender of why people didn't like this boss fight, has definitely been nerfed and more balanced. But there's another boss that you guys are going to be seeing. This is Season 9 gameplay, where this boss has an invisible one-shot at the very end, and we're going to be talking about one-shotting and Mythics and basically the end game of Diablo 4 for the future. So you can see, like, I don't really have too much trouble dealing with the boss. Like, the boss is already dead at this point, right? But there's a huge period in between where, like, the boss has to say, oh, you've defeated me. He has to, like, get the last word in, and then he takes time to die. And this is where you can get an invisible one-shot here. Like, you can't collect your loot. You gotta wait for the whole thing to end. And this is becoming kind of a frustrating mechanic for some players. Now, in this instance over here, you can't just do this boss again and again unless you do the whole entire new Nightmare Escalation dungeon system. But it's basically all around this topic of, like, these bosses being that, like, you have to do them again and again, that they cannot be a pinnacle challenge and a grind activity. And I think that this is really where people get tired of Diablo, and this is the big area where people quit video games, when they feel like they're putting in time into something and it's a slot machine if you're getting it. And this kind of ties into tempering and the masterwork system that people have been very vocal about, and it's kind of strange because I see Blizzard all the time saying, okay, we hear you guys on this, but it's like, well, why don't you say we're going to change it? And they have actually done some things, but I still think that at the end of the day, the core idea of the slot machine is not what people want when it comes to just getting your items in the game. People would prefer to have some sort of guaranteed way. Nowadays, gaming has gotten to the point where people just kind of want their stuff. They've said on the campfire, again, they don't want us to keep on grinding these bosses again and again, but you have to give us other ways to achieve these items. Well, we do have these tributes that we can go ahead and throw in, and we can hopefully get at the very end a Mythic from the Undercity. It's just not relevant enough to keep on having access to it. But a lot of players are also complaining about the invincibility. This has to specifically do with Andariel. I would say out of all the characters, Andariel is the biggest offender when it comes to this, like, invincibility phase where it's like, oh, you can't hit me. And no matter how much damage that you do, because you have to do this again and again and again, people get to the point where, like, I just don't want to do Andariel. I'm going to be straight up with you guys. I have so much Andariel mats, I just simply don't do them. I just give them away. But on top of that, if you go to the Diablo trade website, it's not like people are wanting those. People pretty much get rid of those for a fraction of the cost. And the reason why is it has to all do with people just want their loot, right? And some people were kind of asking about, like, what's the solution to getting one-shotted? Because the solution to, not getting one-shotted is honestly just to one-shot the boss in a lot of video games. And this is a strategy even with Path of Exile. I'm not going to say Path of Exile doesn't have this, where people rely on getting so much DPS that, like, you don't have to learn the mechanics. And I've kind of been reading up, and I think that this one, it pretty much kind of sums up what a lot of people feel about it, is that one shot shouldn't exist in any capacity. It's kind of the boss doing a one shot to the player, but this player is saying one shot should not exist in any capacity. I'm a fan of boss being able to take away like 2/3 of your life with a well choreographed attacks. One shots just aren't fun. And for some reason in action RPGs, this is another thing where, again, there's overlap. It's not just Diablo here that I'm going to be talking about, where Path of Exile has this issue too, where it's like, okay, the boss dies, all right, it's going to explode. It's going to throw this little, like, projectile that's homing, and it's going to follow you, and if you stop, it's going to then explode, and it's going to explode again. It's just like, I just want to collect my loot. And I think in general, though, one-shots, in Diablo 3 in particular, if you guys remember Diablo 3, there's giant orange explosions off the lead side. They're very, very choreographed. It feels fair. Sometimes, though, when there's too many things going on, and this is when you start adding in the new seasonal powers, these Horadric powers, and all these other things, look at what's going on the screen. I'm summoning these Hydras. They're getting bigger. I'm shooting out my ultimate. There's so many things going on in the game where visually, I think that this is where a lot of action RPGs, they may not notice it, especially with certain builds that have so many pets or certain things coming out. It does make it seem fair that it's like choreographed, but because even if it shows up, there's just too much going on in the screen. Also, people are, again, talking more so about like avoiding deaths from, Torment 4 content, and it comes down to getting your resistances up as well as getting your armor up. I've made lots of videos on this, but sometimes it just has to be something that you dodge. So I kind of wanted to write up about certain mechanics in games which I think are like relatively fair. And I say relatively because the first time people go into certain bosses, you're not going to just go in and learn the whole thing the very first time. You might have to die a couple times, and that's okay. But there are bigger offenders here, like for example, like the Maven memory game, or Lilith's Blood Waves was one of the biggest offenders of all time in terms of like Diablo history, where I had seen so many people do this hundreds of times on live stream and fail again and again. And for me, it was entertaining because like I understand how the mechanic works. You go in the kind of a U shape, but the hitbox was so off before they nerfed it. It was very, very difficult. Whether there's other mechanics, if you guys remember this boss, which is Lilith's Lament, this was actually a boss in Act 1. This is a really good designed boss fight. So today, that's kind of the subject that I want to talk about, as well as getting your guys' feedback, because I want to submit this to Blizzard for, of course, Season 9 and the future. So the topic is basically one-shotting and the mythics, kind of like farming them, right? So here's what I've noticed here, is there are people who do want a hard boss fight. I think that that's totally good, and you have to learn the mechanics, because in Diablo, again, most of the time you can just have so much DPS that the boss fight doesn't matter. However, is it really fun? Okay, because at the end of the day, a point of a video game is to have fun, and I think that people get burnt out. They're just like, they just kind of tune out, right? And I think a video game should always be fun, not like, whatever, I'm just gonna kind of play it for the sake of like, I'm getting a maybe 1% chance to drop this item. I feel like that's where it becomes not as fun, as well as the whole mindset of I already know how it's done, but I can't do anything because the boss just takes forever. It has to do this, and it has to do this. And then it's just kind of a time waster. Duriel's kind of an offender of this as well, but it's mainly, again, on Dariel. That boss fight is definitely something where people are really fatigued by it. I can definitely tell from the prices of the materials difference. But I'm looking at this from the perspective of like game design and also feedback from majority of the people talking. So I want to go ahead and state that this isn't just my feedback. Everything that we're going to be talking about is what I've seen in the Diablo community, and as someone that is a Diablo partner, I try to relay this information to Blizzard as far as what I see people talking about. I don't just give Blizzard how I feel about the game, because I never think they should balance the game around people that are like the top 1%ers. And the reason why is because I can dump way more time into the game, and while I can get like genuinely all the mythics that I need for my character in one day, there's people out there that are like, dude, I've been playing for months, I've never gotten a mythic want So I want to try to give them feedback from the average amount of players, not just like the people that can spend, I can only spend 1 hour a month. Like, obviously, at that point, I don't expect that person to get all the mythics every single season. But at the same time, there are people that play the game a lot, and I don't think we should balance the drop rates around them, right? So, first off, the thing is that should the boss be a challenge in a video game? And then also, should you be able to get strong to one-shot the boss? And I want to say that this is at least how I feel about it. I think majority of players are okay with the boss being hard like one time and like you defeat it. Like, let's take Lilith, for example. Like, you defeat Lilith, you get the spark, and you're done. You don't have to like keep on farming her again because she doesn't drop anything good. But at the same time, I like the fantasy of like, man, I finally got to kill the boss. It feels good. Maybe you failed a couple times, right? And once you finally defeat the boss, you feel like you're awesome, right? You're like, man, it took me a bunch of tries, but I got the boss done. But how fun is that to do it 300 times? Again, same philosophy goes back to, they said themselves, they don't want us to farm the bosses again and again, because it's simply not fun. Again, farming the mythics hundreds of times, or getting, nowadays, it's like, not only do you need the mythic, but then you have to farm for that unique. You need to get a high roll. Then you need to also have the correct greater affix, so when you go to the masterworking to go ahead and pull that slot machine, it's just where it becomes not in the fun department. Obviously, when it drops, it kind of feels good, but at this point, I've done so many Mythic farm rates to the point where like it's just not as enjoyable or exciting anymore, because I know that it will eventually drop, but it's just not as exciting as the first time. So in terms of good design from most people's viewpoint is things like Lilith's Lament. At least from my point of view, this boss was awesome. And again, I think they did a really good job on this boss fight. Again, a lot of people probably don't remember this boss fight, but anyways, it's where like this boss throws up a shield, you have to go into it. There's lots of like different like mechanics in this boss fight where like there's waves that you would have to actually like avoid. And I actually like this boss fight, and it's one of the earlier boss fights in the game. And then you get a item that has like, well, back in the day it was just a legendary, but now it's like you get the aspect of like the guy that goes in there. I believe his name's like Yugioh, but like it was really cool. I think that that boss fight was well designed overall, but I think that what makes a boss fight hard is where people feel like it's unfair when you're getting one shot, right? And I would relate this to Lilith's waves as far as the hitboxes in Diablo 4, especially in the pre-nerf department, or at Maven's memory game, or on Dariel. And Dariel's another offender with like, I don't know if I want to consider it bad design, because I think the first time that you fight this character, heck, Gregor is an excellent boss fight, but people have gotten to the point where they're just one-shotting these bosses, and you don't really get to see the Gregor boss fight, where like they kind of move in a checkered pattern. You have to move along this little like maze that he makes. It's actually quite cool, but judging by the feedback, people don't care about that. They don't really want this boss fight where you have this unique thing when you have to do it hundreds of times. I want to say people are okay with it once. And where does that one time excel? And the answer is probably the campaign. If you want to make the campaign like an area where you fight the boss, it's really cool, it's challenging one time, I think that's a good area. But when the players are at the end game, they kind of just want to speed things up. Like basically, they use their materials as kind of keys to open up a chest, right? And when you make them need to open up the chest, 300 times, and that boss is essentially what's blocking them from doing that. They just want to open up the chest. They don't want it. They're like, I already got my keys. I just want to open up the chest. So I think that that's where the game kind of has a lot of players that get burnt out. It's specifically that. Another thing is like in general, people don't want to get one-shotted. Now, this is kind of something that's interesting with Diablo versus other action RPGs. A lot of other action RPGs will require you to invest in some defenses. In Diablo, you do not need max res. You just need 1,000 armor, and you're pretty much good to go. As long as your resistances aren't too negative, if you're in like 20s, 30%, to be honest, there are people that hit rank 1s with very terrible resistances if you look at their builds, because Diablo's HP, this is almost another subject, but the Diablo's HP in the pit starts scaling so high, if you don't have enough damage, you simply, no matter how skilled you are as a player, it does not matter, because you're on a timer, right? Whereas in other games, you don't have this timer, so you can kind of play slower. So that's kind of a game design in itself, where maybe Diablo is flawed. You guys can let me know how you feel about that. Because again, I feel like Pit 100 should be achievable with all of the builds, and then like Pit 150, maybe there's a couple builds, but like right now, there's 0 builds that can do Pit 150. Apart aside from bugs right now in Season 9, with specifically the Barb. I know it just ended recently, but the Barb was like the only class, as far as I'm aware of, that could do 150, and it's because you did negative damage number, right? And then also, people want to be able to one-shot the bosses with no immunity and time wasters. So they don't want the boss to say, Nephilim, I'm going to get you. They don't want any of this. They just want to open up the chest at the end of the day. So I don't know how they can really adjust this. They can make the boss have no voice dialogue. They can remove the immunity phases. I think that that would be something that is okay. And if they want these bosses to have these immunity phases and these cool mechanics that we have to learn, the campaign is great for that. And I think that maybe you could put some of these in the campaign and shift them over, and then that way the players can experience it cool for the first time. They have to learn the mechanics, and then once they defeat it, they can go to the end game, and then the boss kind of either does the mechanic, but you could still do the damage. Maybe this is like kind of like a good give and take. So maybe Andariel could still have that crazy thing that spins around, right? That is partially why it one-shots you, that it's like doing so much damage, right? And then also when it like does the burst, that's where it does technically one-shot you, but at the same time, you would be able to still DPS. So I think people do not want any downtime in terms of time wasters. Even for the Shaper, I've seen people complain about this, but I kind of want to focus mainly on Diablo here, as, I don't have any connections with PoE in terms of telling them feedback, other than just posting on a forum. But like with Diablo, I can directly tell Blizzard, because I'm going to do it right up for Season 9. So I think a lot of people just don't want any immunity phases. So I'm going to give them that feedback. But again, feel free to comment how you guys feel about this. But I've seen this pretty large in the community. And then on top of that, I think people do not like farming the mythics. One time, however, I'm okay with. So the first time I got a Harlequin, I was super excited, and I think that's kind of cool, like get your first mythic. But after you've done it, every single season that I've played, guys, I've gotten pretty much every single mythic every single time. It's because I have to farm these tons and tons of times. As a content creator, you do sometimes need that specific greater affix on the mythic too. Harlequin is a big offender of this if you're playing the Sork. And then going further into Season 9 and as well as Season 8, it's gotten a little bit harder to farm the mythics because you can't just have one person put in the mats and then you guys all benefit off of it. So that makes it even harder because it makes it slower. And I actually really dislike this change, and I'm going to give Blizzard some feedback if that we can go back to the system of one person putting in the materials to kind of go ahead and do it. And their philosophy is that they want people to be able to try to fight the boss without having to put in the keys, and I get that. But one area that I think really encourages people to play together and with their friends is specifically the mythics. Like, I can play the game solo, but as far as mythic farming, it's always more efficient to farm in a group. And that is still true because you have a little bonus. But I think to incentivize people to really play with their friends, don't make them be put in the situation where like one player in the party or two or whatever the case is has to say, guys, I don't have any mats. I can't, I don't want to do the boss. And then one person maybe sometimes is like, all right, little bro, I got you. Here, I'll give you some materials. But at the same time, I think it was actually better the way they had it before, where, again, only one person had to put in the keys. But you guys let me know how you feel about that. But at the end of the day, the whole farming these bosses where you're one-shotting the boss again and again, I would consider it not fun after you get like several mythics. Okay, and it's mainly after you've done it so many times. Maybe they can make something where like, if you have played on your account and you've gotten all the mythics, you get like a special like check mark. You know, it's like kind of like the renown, right? You don't have to do the renown because that kind of sucks. So they made it so it was easier and they just deleted that. So maybe after you've already acquired all the mythics, maybe it's some sort of thing in the codex, it applies it to your account, and then somehow you either get to take at least one mythic from, you know, a previous season and take it to the next season, or an easier way to acquire the mythics. Even though we've gotten so many different ways to craft the sparks, there's still so many people, and even I've made so many videos on how to farm the mythics, a lot of people just can't acquire these and they feel like it takes too long, therefore they burn out. And for the people that have been playing a long time, it is still kind of a pain point in the game in terms of the end game mechanics. So I would say you can maybe look at the Nightmare Dungeon escalations at the very end. Maybe the boss guaranteed drops a mythic. Make it exciting for a season for people to acquire these items that seem like they are impossible. It still seems strange, but there are people out there that have said, I've played the game for so many months and I've never seen a mythic. And I think that it's because they don't know that you have to do the bosses. And I try to stress this. If you're just farming open world content, it's like trying to find a winning lottery ticket in the trash can. It's very unrealistic. But another thing that is kind of interesting here is that the bosses actually forced the meta builds. They said they don't want us to play the same builds again and again. And the thing is that like if you only nerf the top tier builds, well, there's still going to be less builds to play. If you buff up all the other builds, this will really help out the game for its longevity, is letting people play multiple builds, because if you don't delete the boss fast enough, well, you're simply just going to die in a lot of cases, especially on Andariel's. Like, that boss is still relatively challenging because the boss gets to a one-shot point in a lot of them. Even Belial, which I want to say Belial's relatively fair. Like, they have these eyes, and then, you know, one of them's looking the other way. You have to move to the area where the eye will not hit you. I think it's relatively fair, to be honest. But again, a lot of people have been complaining about Belial in particular, saying that they're getting one-shot by him. And again, the thing is if people are forced to play that meta build, well, then of course, they're just going to play that build so they can avoid the mechanic versus like, oh, I want to play the mechanic, because at the end of the day, their whole goal with doing the boss is they just want to turn the key and open up that, you know, chest that's going to have maybe the mythic. So it kind of forces people to play the meta when the balance of the game is kind of out of whack. And I want to say Diablo has been in a really strange spot, because it's like, if you guys remember like season 2, we had the Hodabarb and the ball lightning sork. It was like really fun, right? And then now, like, you don't see any ball lightning sorks. You don't see any like pure Hodabarbs. It's all like earthquakes or like, you know, dust devils. It's not just like the pure variant points of, let's say, the builds that we remember, right? And I think that buffing up some of the other builds will help out with the end game because, again, it doesn't force people to actually play those things. And then, again, this is the one thing that I want to go ahead and re-highlight. So I think players are okay with the boss doing a big chunk of the damage. I'm not sure how they would balance this in terms of like percent damage. That way, no matter how strong that you get, and I'm curious to know how you guys feel about this. What if the boss always dealt 2/3 of your HP or 1/3 or a percent, right? So if the boss does a percent of your HP, that means no matter how strong you get, it's always going to do the same amount. Otherwise, you lead to it being either a one-shot or it doesn't one-shot. And the thing with Diablo is the builds that are good are like thousands of times better than the builds that are like non-meta. And it's a very big difference compared to other action RPGs. Like in PoE, sure, there might be some like, outliers once in a while, like Lightning Spear right now. But there are a lot of other like skills that are pretty decent. But like with Diablo, it's like you're not playing meta. Oh, your build sucks, man. You can't even play with us. That actually did happen quite a lot of times. I remember previously, this was kind of something that was actually a toxic thing in specifically season 6, if you guys remember how broken Spiritborn was, and they've toned it down. But I remember like a lot of people would get kicked out of parties if they were not playing Spiritborn. I saw a lot of posts on this on the forums, specifically on Reddit as well, and people were complaining that like if I don't play Spiritborn, people are kicking me out of the party. It's like, that's the reality of like certain things in, MMOs. There's a lot of times where like people will check your gear score, or they look at like, are you tank? Nope, I'm kicking you, because tank's usually a role that has a lot less players, where a lot of people want to play damage. But Diablo is in the situation where like we don't really have roles. Everyone should just be able to hop in and play, and I think that that's one thing that Diablo 3 did really well. But as far as it goes in terms of one-shotting, let me know how you guys feel about bosses doing a percent damage instead of one shot, because that way, no matter how strong you get, because this is a double-edged sword, your build still will feel weak against the boss. Is that okay? Or do you guys prefer it to be like some sort of like number that you need to reach a threshold, right? But here's how I feel about like Lilith, because even though she's probably one of the most difficult bosses in the game, that and Andariel, but after one time, there is no reason to do this boss. So even though I would argue that like Lilith and Andariel are the harder bosses, if it's the first time, people will do it, but they don't want to do these bosses again. So maybe you can make the rewards better. So instead of, let's say, changing the Andariel boss fight, because I get it, it's going to take time to code these certain things, you either let us like delete Andariel like a lot faster, or you make Andariel worth like triple the loot. So then people will think, okay, well, this is the hardest boss, but she gives us way better loot. So there is going to be some reason to do it. So that's what I was thinking about in terms of giving them feedback. So let me know, guys, how you feel about that. Should we just keep the boss fights the same, and then in terms of Andariel, and there are some other boss fights that have like a little bit longer mechanics, like Duriel's definitely longer than Belial. Belial you can just delete, right? So that's kind of the reason why people do him the most. Plus, you can select whatever you want for the rewards. But it's mainly that like you can just like delete the boss. So on the bosses that we cannot instant delete, should we double, triple, quadruple the amount, maybe, and kind of balance it within the time frame of how long it takes to do. But now that we've gotten to the end of it, these are my suggestions and conclusions, even though I kind of gave you guys one of them already. So the conclusion is, I don't think people mind having a challenge, but if you have to do the boss too many times to maybe get the loot, it leads to people leaving the game. And the Diablo 4 team said it themselves, they don't want us to farm bosses on auto repeat, but then how do we get the mythics? So that's going to be a question that I would love for you guys to be able to answer. Maybe we can have a lot more consistency with, let's say, the Undercity, or maybe if you could do the pit and once in a while a mythic could drop, just a lot higher chance than in the current state of the game. They did say that they're going to correlate more rewards the higher that you go up, but I got a screenshot of a 150 done, and it dropped 2 GAs. It didn't drop like, mythics weren't raining down from the sky when you did a 150. So as you go higher, maybe there's higher chance for mythics, but at the same time, in order to get those high tiers of the pit, you would need the mythics already in the first place, right? So it's like, okay, you want the good loot, well, you have to have the good loot before you get the good loot. So I don't know, how would you guys fix the mythics? Definitely let me know. And there is actually something that Blizzard did, which is great for Season 9. So they are giving us more runes in terms of drops, so that's a plus, but remember, you're still going to need those sparks anyways, which of course require you to get a mythic that you don't want. And we'll talk more about like buffing the bad mythics, because I think that this is also something that should be looked at, specifically with like Melted Heart of Selig, the Spear of Arion, or like was it Lycander? We also have like the Shattered Vow. There's a lot of these mythics that just simply suck in the game. Like Grandfather is not really seeing that much play, but like that one's not bad. But you look at the other mythics like like who's playing these, right? And I don't think any of the mythics should be bad. At least like, you know, one cool build for each mythic that is viable, I think could be an option, because people don't like getting the rare side in the game and then it's just, you know, kind of trash fodder, right? So I was thinking about like other things that we can do to try to help the fatigue here, because I think this is a big offender here, is that the mythics are just a slot machine, right? And it takes so long. And again, if you don't want us to farm the bosses on auto repeat, you have to maybe give us another way to farm the mythics. Or you can also think about maybe putting in more material. If you guys remember, there used to be like, there was like the tormented bosses and then you like juice them up so it had a higher drop chance. Maybe we can bring that back in some capacity, because like maybe you could put in 10 times the materials for 10 times the difficulty. But then I think at the end of the day, people are still going to one-shot it. But at least that way you have a little bit more consistency with the mythics. It just kind of saves us the time, right? It's going to be way harder, but on top of that, we're still putting in the same amount of materials. It's just that we get our result a little bit faster, so it doesn't feel as bad. But I was also thinking about this solution. What if we can put in more material and there would be 100%? So like, let's say you put in, I don't know, 20, 30 times the amount of mats and I get 100%. And each one of the bosses has like a set of drops. That way, like if I need Starless Skies, I do Duriel. If I need to get like, you know, Tyraels or Shroud of False Death, because no one uses Tyraels. But like, let's say I need a Shroud of False Death, I do Andariel. Like they're guaranteed drops, but I put in more, or I can get maybe specific runes from the boss if I put in a certain amount. That way it removes the slot machine mechanic, because again, I think for returning players, it's just a pain to farm the mythics at the end of the day. And then also waiting for the boss's phase to, like, you know, because if you do enough damage to one-shot the boss, you just don't want to wait. And so that's at least how I feel about the current state of like the mythics, as well as a lot of players' feedback that really leads to fatigue. Because when you're doing these nightmare dungeons, as well as like the pit, I would say there's a little bit less fatigue, and nothing gets me more like fatigued, honestly, than specifically the bosses and like one-shotting them again and again. I'm so tuned out to the game until I see that purple beam. I'm like halfway asleep, and I think that a video game should never have the player halfway asleep. That's the way I feel about it. But let me know your thoughts down below, and like I said, later this week I'm going to be writing up my feedback for Blizzard, and I'll let you guys know about that for specifically Season 9. But anyways, if you guys made it this far into the video, hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Again, comment down below, because I need to give this feedback to Blizzard, and I want to know your thoughts. Maybe you guys have some cool ideas, but peace out.